Right as I was planting the last mums for my wife's memorial garden, she marched over in tennis shoes and cut clean through my fence, said it violated community aesthetics. Name's Silas Mercer. Been living here 22 years. Retired systems planner. Didn't say much then. Just picked up the map she stepped on. Creased edge my father's name still visible and set the camera rolling as the HOA letter fluttered on my mailbox. Ever had someone try to erase your history with a clipboard and a smile? I came home to find a clean cut through my fence and Rowena Kincaid standing on the other side holding a rolled-up plat map like a sword. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, the way she planted her feet said she'd been waiting. I said nothing. Just looked at the gap, then at her, then at the rolled map that had started to uncoil in the breeze. Access, she said. Shared by historical precedent. Article 7, subsection C. She tapped the rulebook she carried in her other hand, worn tabbed, highlighted like a law student's notebook. I still said nothing. She raised an eyebrow. You'll want to check with the HOA office. We mailed you the notice 2 weeks ago. That part was a lie. I check my mail every evening, same as I have since the post office misdelivered my tax return in '09, but I let it pass. Not the moment for a debate and certainly not on my lawn. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed open the camera, and pressed record. Her smile twitched. Just a fraction. Then she turned and walked away through the opening her men had made. No apology, no backward glance. The fence wire swung behind her, one coil twisting in the wind like a bent finger. Back inside, I took off my jacket and went straight to the filing cabinet. Bottom drawer, home records. A dozen folders most untouched since Judith passed. I worked through them carefully, laying papers on the table like old bones. When I reached for the home insurance file, an old map drawn by my father slipped from the box, creased dusty and marked in faded blue ink. I unfolded it slowly, brushing away a smudge with the back of my hand. The line of the fence curved deliberately around a thick patch of sumac far from the property border Rowena had claimed. C. L. Mercer. November 1980. His signature was still there, inked with quiet certainty. I pulled my reading lamp closer, scanning every mark. There was a red X near the southern tree line and a note I hadn't noticed before: "Do not encroach natural runoff." My father was a soft-spoken man, but meticulous. He didn't sketch lines without reason. The next morning, the HOA letter arrived, typewritten, folded clean, and taped to my mailbox. I didn't need to read past the second sentence. You are hereby instructed to remove the recently reconstructed fence within 5 business days due to obstruction of historical community access. Signed, of course, by Rowena Kincaid. I set the letter down beside my father's map. The plat she waved yesterday had been machine-printed and laminated. This one was hand-measured, patient honest. And the line she'd cited, it didn't match. I traced it again with my finger. It curved exactly where her workers had cut. I sat for a long while, map spread on the table fence wire still swinging in my mind. The fluorescent lights hummed above as the HOA meeting came to order. The folding chairs beneath us squeaked like discontented neighbors. I sat in the back row, not out of shame, just closer to the exit. Rowena Kincaid called the meeting to attention with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She adjusted the collar on her fitted gray blazer, looked down at the agenda, and said, "Before we begin, just a friendly reminder to all homeowners about fence compliance. Historical easements are not suggestions." A few chuckles rippled across the room. I didn't join them. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Across the aisle, Mrs. Nell Hargrave leaned closer. Her perfume was lavender and mothballs. "That piece of land behind your shed?" she whispered, voice low but pointed. "Wasn't that your daddy's before the Kincaid house even existed?" I gave a small nod. She patted my forearm once like a punctuation mark, then turned back toward the podium. Rowena continued her list: tree height violations, recycling bin lids left ajar. Halloween decorations lingering past reasonable date. Every infraction had a paragraph, a penalty, and a price tag. When someone raised a question about sidewalk repairs, she deflected with a motion to table it until December. The gavel clicked like a tooth on enamel. When she brought up the shared path behind lot lines 11 through 15, her tone shifted into something silkier. There exists precedent, she said, for homeowners to honor traditional routes of access. In 1994, a fence was voluntarily realigned by a prior owner of Lot 13, documented in board minutes, though the file was unfortunately lost in the 2006 water leak. I made no sound, just clicked my pen once and noted the phrase precedent unverified. Nell raised her hand gently, her voice weathered but steady. I don't recall any shared path back then. What I do remember is your father planting arborvitae along that line in '83. Rowena smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Hargrave. We'll be sure to check community landscaping archives, which didn't exist. HOA didn't begin landscaping records until 2001, and I doubted Rowena cared for trees anyway. I left quietly once the gavel dropped. Back home, I poured myself a mug of reheated coffee and opened the county GIS website. The parcel viewer was slow-looked, like it hadn't been updated since Windows XP, but eventually the satellite map loaded. I entered my address, zoomed in. There it was, a sliver of land maybe 6 feet wide running along the back edge of my property and into the Kincaids. It was shaded gray and labeled Undesignated Strip, Not Claimed. I leaned in, heart ticking faster than the wall clock behind me. That wasn't an easement. It was unowned, or at least unrecorded. I opened another tab county treasurer's site this time and searched by parcel number. Same result, no active owner. Last transaction, 1979. Buried in a sidebar was a link petition for auction of abandoned land. I clicked. It was a real form. One-page PDF. If a parcel had been unclaimed and untaxed for more than 20 years, a neighbor could request a public auction. The fee, $50 and proof of notice. I saved it to my desktop. The next day, an envelope slid into my mailbox, no stamp, just a HOA header and my name typed clean across. Inside, a printed email from Rowena's legal assistant. To Mr. Silas Mercer. Subject obstruction of access, HOA compliance warning. This is a second and final notice regarding non-compliant fencing. If obstruction is not removed by the stated deadline, penalties of up to $150 per day may apply. The date on the letter was yesterday. The clock was ticking. I folded the email and set it beside the auction form. Then I reached for my father's old map again. The line he drew didn't just guide a fence, it drew a boundary of silence, of quiet resistance. And I was beginning to follow it. Byron worked in the GIS department over at the county annex. He had once played bass in a garage band with me back when we thought college was optional, and cigarettes made us look interesting. He'd stayed local, got married, and ended up mapping every square foot of Mosswood Glen. His office was a time capsule, metal cabinets, curl-edged topo maps, half-drunk coffee, steaming on a stack of parcel forms. The radiator hissed like a snake trying to sleep. "All right," he said, sliding a rolled plan set across the desk, "your lot's listed as Parcel 12B from the old 1980 survey. Your dad filed that map himself. I remember it came in hand-delivered, folded 4 times, and sealed with electrician's tape." He pulled up the GIS overlay on his second screen. Thin red lines crisscrossed the digital landscape. Then he laid a clear sheet over it, printed from the old map, and aligned the points. I leaned in, holding my breath. "There's your fence," he said, and that he tapped the gray strip is what we call an orphan parcel. Never annexed, never taxed, no title recorded past 1979, and no easement filings either. I exhaled slowly. "So, what does that mean for me?" He opened a drawer and pulled out a paper marked Petition for Public Auction, Abandoned Parcel. "It means," he said, "you're first in line, by law. You submit interest, they post public notice, no one else contests. It goes up for bid in 30 days. Low competition, low price. Quiet wins." He scanned the hand-drawn map my father made and added it to the file. I'll email you the full overlay set. Use those with the form. Oh, and make sure you notify the HOA just for optics. Doesn't change anything legally, but looks clean." I nodded, still absorbing. You always did keep your head when the rest of us panicked. "Someone had to." He smirked. Then he added, almost to himself, "Funny how folks like Rowena always rediscover community access once they've paved over half the woods." That night the house was silent except for the rattle of the heater and the soft click of my mouse. I'd cleaned the scanner glass twice, triple-checked the attachments, and reread the auction process paragraph 6 times. Byron's email was open on one screen. The petition form sat ready on the other. The scanned map glowed in digital clarity, my father's curved line now overlaid with GPS-coordinated precision. Below it, his signature, C.L. Mercer, November 1980. I wrote a short email to the County Public Lands Office. "Dear Mr. Lowe, I'm submitting my formal interest in the unclaimed parcel adjoining Lot 12B in Mosswood Glen, previously recorded on file 1980 MR 47. Attached are the GIS overlay historic map and petition form. Please advise next steps and any posting requirements. Sincerely, Silas Mercer." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I sat back and watched the cursor blink in the empty field. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is click. Send quietly without fanfare. The fence posts hadn't even set in the concrete when the second letter arrived, taped neatly to my mailbox like a scarlet warning. This time, the charge was visual disruption of community character. I stood there for a while, the morning frost crackling under my boots, holding that letter like it might bite. Back inside, I laid it next to the first letter, careful not to overlap the two. They deserved their own space. The table was now a battlefield of correspondence. HOA printouts, county auction documents, and my father's framed map, its blue ink faded to a whisper but still louder than most voices in Mosswood Glen. Still going at it, Delaney asked, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. She wore one of her mother's old scarves, twisted the same way Judith used to knot it when she was bracing for a storm. I nodded, flipping open my laptop. The county website was finally showing the auction notice plain as daylight. Strip parcel 118B, noted as undesignated, now queued for sale. My name was the only one on the intent to bid. "You know," Delaney said, leaning over my shoulder, "Mom used to get letters like that." She stopped answering them. "She didn't need to," I said. "People knew better." The screen buzzed with a notification, Byron, on speakerphone. "You're first in line legally," he said, voice fuzzy from the archive basement. "No one else filed, not even Rowena. You've got 60 days to finalize the deed." 60 days. Byron emailed over the formal confirmation. I printed it, clipped it beside the HOA letters, and slid it under a new manila folder labeled Land Action, Mercer. The quiet satisfaction of documentation. No yelling, no accusations. Just paperwork, the kind that binds tighter than rope. Delaney looked at the pile of forms. "You could sue, you know. Block their access entirely. You've got grounds." I shook my head. Better to let paper speak. There was silence, save for the slow creak of our old radiator and the distant rustle of winter wind. Delaney walked to the fireplace and stood there, her back, straight hands folded like Judith's used to when she was worried. Outside, the mountains sat patient. Mosswood Glen's HOA building was just barely visible beyond the bare trees. A red pickup drove past, slowed for half a second enough to notice my unfinished fence, then moved on. That afternoon, I did what I hadn't done in decades. I pulled out my old drill-finished setting the last post and framed my father's map on the wall above my desk. It wasn't art, but it meant more than any painting. The prop lines on the scanned version had matched the GIS overlay perfectly. The curved border traced exactly where Rowena had her workman cut. The old ink might have faded, but the truth it held hadn't. Evening came with a sharpness. I sat by the window nursing cold coffee when Delaney slid an envelope toward me. "It came for you," she said. "Certified mail." I opened it slowly. a law firm, Rowena's, embossed in dark blue, inside a formal notice. Your recent actions may constitute obstruction of communal rights under Section 7.4b of the Mosswood Glen HOA Code. Legal remedies will be pursued should this obstruction not be rectified. I folded it twice, then again until it fit neatly behind the others. My eyes drifted to the map on the wall, and I let out a slow breath. Silence is strategy, not surrender. The final bid was mine for $174.25, and not a single other name had even shown up on the registry. I sat alone in my den that evening, the kitchen table smothered in printouts receipts and the final deed that had just arrived in a manila envelope. The paper still held the residual chill of the courthouse filing office, and I ran my fingers along the raised seal like it might vanish if I looked away. Through the slats of the mini-blinds, early spring sunlight angled across the floor, carving up the rug into strips of gold and shadow. Outside, a few kids played with a basketball down near the cul-de-sac, the thud of the ball so steady it sounded like a metronome, marking the end of one phase of my life and the start of something sharper. Byron called just as I was pouring coffee. "You sure about this, Silas?" "I am." "She won't believe you went through with it," he said. "That's when folks like Rowena get dangerous. They think the HOA is a crown and they're wearing it." I smiled into the receiver. "Then, I guess it's time for the peasants to read the land deeds." Delaney came by in the afternoon, arms full of groceries and a brow already furrowed. "Dad," she said, nodding toward the private access, Mercer property signs drying on the porch rail. "Is this your idea of subtle?" "No," I said. "It's my idea of final." I spent the rest of the day setting the signs, 3 in total, spaced evenly along the inner fence line that separated my yard from the disputed strip. I used brass screws and a level just like my father taught me. There was satisfaction in the act, something ceremonial about putting language into the ground. The surveyor I'd hired, an ex-Marine named Ulrich, who smelled faintly of diesel and peppermints, had come by earlier that week to hammer in 4 discrete boundary stakes. "You won't even notice them after the grass comes up," he said, pocketing his receipt book. "But legally, they're granite. Neighbors noticed, of course." I saw the curtains twitch. One man down the street, Cantwell, I think gave me a small nod as he passed on his evening walk. Another neighbor, Glenna Merriweather, paused at her mailbox, looked over the fence, then back at her feet. No one said a word. Until Rowena. She appeared just after 6:15 p.m., dressed in white tennis gear and a sun visor racket still in hand like she'd come from battle. She stormed up the edge of the fence heels, crunching dried grass, and jabbed a manicured finger toward the new signs. "You're trespassing on community land," she shouted, voice already climbing. I didn't rise from the patio chair. I simply leaned over and unzipped the canvas folder sitting beside me. From it, I removed the notarized title deed, laminated and sealed. "This is mine now," I said, calm as April dusk. Filed, stamped, and recorded with the county. She didn't take it. She just stood there, breathing heavy, the racket now drooping at her side. "Your little technicalities won't stand," she hissed. "They aren't technicalities," I replied. "They're documents." Rowena pulled out her phone and dialed with a practiced flick of the thumb. She didn't bother to step away. "Hey," she barked into the speaker, pacing back and forth. "He went through with it. The whole thing. Title, signs, everything. You hear me? He thinks he's clever. He won't get away with this." She looked up, then eyes catching mine. I didn't flinch. Behind her, the neighborhood was still. Even the basketball game had paused. Just sunlight signs and the slight rustle of a new page turning. They called a special HOA meeting. I called Byron and brought the original map. The flyer arrived, folded into my mailbox with a clip art gavel on the top. Special session of the Mosswood Glen HOA, it read, to resolve recent property disputes affecting communal easements. In the margin, someone had scribbled mandatory for all homeowners. Subtle as a brick. Byron showed up 10 minutes before it started. He wore a flannel button-up and a leather belt with a cracked buckle that had probably seen more courthouse steps than Rowena's entire legal team. He didn't bring a briefcase, just the same beaten laptop and a manila folder under his arm. "Got the overlay files I asked." He patted the folder. "And the county stamp in case she wants to play sheriff." The HOA community hall still smelled like pine sol and polyester chairs. A flat screen had been mounted since the last meeting, probably to modernize presentations, though I doubted Rowena would use it for anything but control. The crowd was twice as big this time. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months showed up with folding fans and lukewarm coffee. Rowena stood at the front smiling like a funeral director. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she began smoothing a stack of papers. "Tonight's meeting addresses a matter of unauthorized fencing and the obstruction of a community easement that has historically allowed access between Ridgeview Lane and the Central Greenway." She paused for dramatic effect. "We believe the fence in question recently reconstructed by Mr. Mercer violates both the spirit and the letter of HOA guidelines." I didn't raise my hand. I simply stood and walked to the front, Byron behind me. I plugged a flash drive into the TV input and waited as the flat screen flickered, then displayed the scanned 1980 map my father had drawn, blue ink fading under the county's digital overlay. "This is the original parcel map," I said. "Drawn by C.L. Mercer. Notarized on November 2, 1980. Gasps from the middle row. Nell Hargrave leaned forward in her folding chair, eyes sharp beneath her crocheted hat. "This parcel here," I clicked the laser pointer Byron had handed me, "was never part of the communal walkway. It was retained by the Mercer estate and never sold, transferred, or annexed. That was confirmed by the county's GIS office and archived deed records." I glanced at Byron. He stepped forward. "I can verify the overlay," he said, "and the absence of any recorded easement across that strip. As far as the county is concerned, it's private property recently auctioned under due process." Someone in the back cleared their throat. Rowena didn't sit. "This is about access, not paperwork. Neighbors have used that path for decades." Nell stood up slowly, bracing on the seat in front of her. "Not since '91, Rowena," she said. "That's when the Godley family built the first fence. Your father-in-law signed the petition, if memory serves." A ripple of murmurs. I remember Nell added, "Because I baked a pie for the meeting. Apple. With cardamom." Rowena's jaw twitched. "This vote is premature," she said. "The board needs time to review these unexpected documents." I held up the manila folder. "These are certified. Originals are on file with the county. You can review them any time." Silence spread like ink. The board members looked at each other, then down at their papers. Finally, Howard Lasky, the treasurer, a retired Marine with arthritis, cleared his throat. "I motion to affirm Mr. Mercer's ownership and remove this parcel from the easement registry." "Seconded," someone said. I couldn't see who. "All in favor?" Howard asked. 4 hands went up, 1 didn't. "The motion carries," Howard said, rubbing his temple. There was a pause, a quiet one. Then a ripple of applause, not loud, not long, but there. Rowena gathered her things with the controlled precision of someone suppressing rage. Before leaving, she paused at the side aisle and leaned toward a man in a gray suit sitting near the back. They exchanged a few hushed words. He didn't speak during the meeting, didn't even shift his posture. I watched them walk out together side by side, but unspeaking. The door clicked shut behind them. The lights overhead buzzed faintly. I stayed a moment longer, then unplugged the flash drive and folded the map carefully back into its sleeve. I didn't need to say anything. The documents had spoken. A week later, a small handmade sign appeared on Rowena's lawn for sale by owner. Motivated seller. The rain had rinsed most of the pollen off the porch railings, and the mulch she'd once spread so precisely now lay scattered and gray. Her tennis net was gone. Her sedan no longer parked at a perfect 45-degree angle. The porch light never came on again. I was in the backyard clearing out wild blackberry shoots when Delaney arrived with gloves and a tarp. "Please tell me you're not planning to pave the whole thing," she said. "Just enough for a pavilion," I replied, "and a bench or two." She squinted. "You're not going to gloat, right? Only thing worth gloating about is quiet," I said, prying up a rusted fence post with the flat of a spade. The air smelled of wet stone and pine. From the porch I could see the edge of Rowena's roof, still mossy from the last hard rain. Somewhere a woodpecker knocked against an old trunk like a metronome keeping time. Delaney and I worked in silence until the sun climbed past the dogwoods. I'd called in the permit request 2 days prior reclassification of the parcel as community use pavilion area. The woman on the phone said she hadn't processed a form with that many signatures since the library expansion in '06. I placed the form and a tray of lemon bars on the kitchen table side by side like offerings. Each signature was neat, some in shaky cursive. I recognized names from mailboxes I'd forgotten: Mr. Ferris, the Everly twins, and Mrs. Nell Hargrave, who still sent cards on Flag Day. That afternoon, Nell came by with a lemon pie in both hands. "He would have loved this," she said. "Your husband." She nodded, looking toward the patch of grass where we'd cleared the last of the bramble. "Ron laid the first bricks there in '81, she said. "Not for a walkway, just to keep his tomatoes out of the mud." I set the pie down and pulled out a folding chair. She didn't sit, just stood there breathing the air like it was full of ghosts and stories she hadn't told in years. Children had already started coming through again. One of them left a drawing in the sidewalk chalk by the edge of the newly opened strip: a crooked house, a blue sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Delaney snapped a photo. "Community art," she said. "Don't paint over it." "I wasn't planning on it," I said. That evening I received a manila envelope postmarked from a firm 2 counties over. The letter inside was printed in a serif font too dignified for its content. It spoke vaguely of natural transit rights and uninterrupted historical usage, but it carried no county stamp, no seal, no signature from a judge. I set it aside without reading the last paragraph. Instead, I walked out to the edge of the cleared land where the grass still held the shape of the bench we'd just moved. The breeze had picked up slightly, and I could hear wind chimes from the open window of the Clark's house. There, where dispute had been, now stood potential, a space not for arguing over, but for gathering. What we leave behind isn't just meaty, or title or lines on a map. It's how people remember walking through it. I hammered the last brass plaque onto the side post just as the sun crested over the dogwoods. Mercer Pavilion. Established 2022. The letters caught the light sharp and warm against the cedar frame. Behind me, Delaney knelt near the base of the pergola, pressing marigold starters into fresh soil. The morning smelled of mulch and spring air with a hint of smoke from the kettle someone had lit on the community grill. A robin trilled from the fence post as if declaring the space officially open. "You ever going to frame that old map?" Delaney asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. I didn't answer, just smiled and walked to the table I'd set up beneath the shade. The map was already framed, wrapped in brown craft paper and tied with a loop of jute. It sat next to a stack of printed newsletters and a tin of shortbread cookies. "Feels like the end of something," she said. Maybe I replied, "But ends are quieter than people expect." That's how you know they're real. Neighbors trickled in over the hour. Mrs. Nell arrived with her knitting basket and a fresh batch of lemon bars. She picked a shady spot near the back and began working a loose stitch while greeting each new arrival by name. The Everly boys rolled in with a bag of folding chairs and a Bluetooth speaker softly playing fiddle music. No ceremony, no speeches, just chairs unfolded, cups poured, and stories drifting in the breeze. A little girl no more than 6 tugged at Nell's sleeve. "Who's Mr. Mercer?" she asked, pointing to the plaque. Nell didn't look up from her yarn. "He drew the map, sweetheart, long time ago, so we'd know where we stood." I took the framed map from the table and hung it inside the pavilion wall directly above a small brass plate etched with 5 words. Some lines matter, some don't. The crowd leaned in to study it. They saw the familiar boundary lines, the faint blue ink from 1980, and my father's looping signature. Some nodded quietly, others didn't say a word, but no one asked why it was there. That afternoon, a couple I hadn't met before walked up the gravel path with a toddler in tow. "This place is beautiful," the woman said. "We heard it used to be." Something else. I wiped my hands on a towel and met her gaze. "Depends who tells the story," I said. Delaney handed them paper cups of iced tea. The man asked where they could sit. I pointed to the east side where the shadows fell soft over the new benches. They thanked us and made their way over the child hopping in puddles as she went. Later, when the sun dipped low and the crowd thinned, I sat alone under the pergola. The plaque caught the last orange light of the day. I traced the edge of the map with one finger, creased familiar hole. What began as a cut fence had become something else entirely. Not a symbol of defense, but of continuity. No one would fight over that land again because now it belonged to memory and purpose, not policy. No one noticed when Rowena's house finally sold. The new family moved in quiet, no balloons or trucks. Just a porch light that flickered on again and a bicycle leaning against the garage. The lawn got mowed, but the lines weren't razor-sharp anymore, just grass like everyone else's. As the evening settled in, I poured the last of the tea into a thermos and folded up the tablecloth. Some lines stay on paper, some fade with time, and some just enough turn into places where people meet. The pavilion stood quiet that evening, its cedar posts still warm from the sun. A robin's call echoed faintly, and beneath the brass plaque the framed map no longer looked like proof, it looked like peace. Sometimes we fight not to win, but to preserve something quieter, the right to draw boundaries without burning bridges. What began with a fence ended with a table, and what we protect says just as much as what we let go. If you're facing a situation that feels like a loss, maybe it's just a legacy waiting to be redrawn. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Tell me your story, or save it for the right porch, the right morning.